Welcome to Fantastic Fiber Friday, and today we're going to talk about boucle yarns. And the interesting thing about a boucle yarn is there's actually kind of a specific recipe to creating a boucle yarn. You need one thin yarn and one thick yarn, one that's tightly spun and one that's loosely spun, and one that's spun to the left and one that's spun to the right. So, keeping all these things in mind, whew, I think my seat's going to give up. Okay, keeping all that in mind, what I'm trying to do is I found myself just to help save myself some time and some spinning, I did not spin the thin yarn. So what I have here is I have a cotton that's very tightly spun that's thin. And it's actually last spun to the left. And then I also have some hand spun here. It's just a single ply. It's a thick and thin nubbly wool that has been spun to the right. So to make a boucle, it's actually very similar to, I was working on this earlier, to working with the slub yarn, making a spiral slub. It's very similar to making a spiral slub. So let me get my shoes off here from my spinning wheel, and I'm gonna go ahead and try to tilt the camera down a little bit. Oop, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Hi, Deanie. Yeah, Deanie's going to supervise today, I guess. And you're going to spin to the left. You want to spin in the direction of the tightly spun yarn, in the same direction it was last spun, and you're just kind of wrapping the loops, letting the other one just wrap around it. You want to keep the tightly spun yarn, the thinner yarn, usually, fairly taut, and just let the other wrap around. And what you're going to do with this, once you have this spun up like this, is you're going to cable it, and I will show you kind of how it will look cabled. You usually just cable this back upon itself. Now let me pull a little bit of this out, and I'm going to grab an orifice tool and kind of hang it on there. It's caught on one of those. Hang it on there as weight and let it ply back upon itself, so you can kind of see what that looks like. And that is the first and easiest way to make a boucle. It will have to be cabled or spun back on itself. You can cable it with something else if you like, but I kind of like the look of how it looks cabled back upon itself. So, I mean, just very simple. Remember, it's one spun right, one spun left, one tightly spun, one loosely spun, and one thick, one thin. And that is how you create a boucle. Now, this other yarn that I spun up with it just happened to be some locks that I spun up. So, they're very textural. It's very textural. Almost like a slub yarn, but not quite. And you're going to need a lot more of the loosely spun, excuse my dryer there, a lot more of the loosely spun yarn than you will need of the tightly spun yarn, because you are wrapping it around. So you need to bear that in mind when you decide to spin this type of yarn. You're going to need much more of it. Let me see if I can move this back up. There we go. Hello. And that is how you actually spin a boucle yarn. One tightly spun, one loosely spun, one thick, one thin, one twisted to the left, and one twisted to the right. I hope you have a lot of fun making your own boucle yarn. Boucle yarn. And I hope you found this informative. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you next week.